everyone. Welcome to the second part of the conference on democracy. Let me just get this correct. Looking at democracy and constitutional rights, Future of Democracy Conference at the University of the Bahamas, and it's in the library, the lecture theater in the 8 Harry Seymour Library. So if you're hearing in the sound of our voices, please come over. It's an exciting session today. We've had some very good presenters on topics so far, so we're going to continue in that same vein. I now have the pleasure of introducing Mrs. Jamal Archer. And Mr. Archer is a dedicated researcher and mentor whose academic work explores the intersection of family dynamics, childhood experiences, and pathways to criminality. He is currently his topic for this afternoon is childhood trauma among criminal offenders reared in single mother households. And so this should be a very interesting topic because we're also trying to discover and understand criminality, and especially we tend to look at we tend to focus on single mothers, so we should be able to get a better understanding of what is happening. He draws his interest in understanding how early environments shape male identity, behavior, and life outcomes. With a strong academic background in the social sciences, Jamal has focused his scholarship on issues of father absence, single mother households, and the psychosocial factors that contribute to factors of offending. His research aims to contribute to both academic understanding and practical solutions that support healthier family structures and interventions for at-risk youth. Beyond academia, Jamal has been actively engaged in mentorship work with boys, providing guidance, positive role modeling, and practical support to help them navigate challenges related to identity, purpose, and resilience. His mentorship initiatives emphasize the importance of presence, accountability, and community in shaping the next generation of men. Jamal is married to Leslie Archer, and together they have 2 sons, Joshua and Jonathan, who continue to inspire his work and commitment to strengthening families and communities. And so without further ado, I would like to ask and invite Mr. Archer to the podium. And please, can we hold your questions until after he has finished presenting, and then we'll open the floor to discussion.
Good afternoon, everyone. So this is actually my research proposal. And I'm elated to be here today to present to you on the topic childhood trauma among criminal offenders reared in single mother households. What are the most common reasons males commit crimes? Usually we focus on the biological, cultural, and social factors. We're quite aware of those. My research will focus mostly on developmental factors and psychological factors. This is where I believe I could make a contribution. Single parent households. I'm sure you should be aware that single parent household is globally a global phenomenon, and it's on the rise. Approximately 320 million children live in single parent households, with 80% led by mothers. This figure is projected to rise this year. We see similarities right in the Bahamas here. In 1987, an estimated 64% of all households in New Providence were headed by single parents, most of whom were women. In the Bahamas, over 62% of children are now born out of wedlock, with most being raised again by single mothers. Interestingly, research shows a positive relationship between female-headed households and violent crimes. A significant amount of violent crime offenders, they emerge from single-parent households, predominantly households led by women. Father presence or father absence. The research is showing that the presence of a father decreases the chance of a boy becoming a criminal offender. This doesn't mean that boys in homes with fathers do not experience abuse. It just so happens that boys who come from homes with fathers, they are least likely to end up in prison. Childhood trauma strongly predicts later criminal antisocial behavior. So many of the boys who have experienced some trauma in their early developmental stages, these are the men who we often find in prison. This work, Our Prisoners, a collective paper. This was done by Fielding and others right here at the university. This really inspired my work. When you review this document, you get to hear the voice of prisoners. And most male inmates were raised by single mothers. And the research there is showing that with father absence is strongly linked to gang involvement. Whether or not the mother is present, father absent determines whether or not boys join gangs, which in turn leads to a life of crime. My research purpose is to investigate how childhood trauma influences criminal behavior among Bahamian men reared by single mothers. Specifically, it examines the interplay between trauma, family dynamics, and male socialization. By exploring these connections, the research aims to generate insights that can guide strategies to support vulnerable families and reduce male involvement in crime. The significance of this study explores how Bahamian men internalize gender roles and how father absence and trauma shape pathways into crime for those raised in single mother households. By analyzing offender narratives, it highlights structural and cultural drivers of youth violence and provides evidence to guide gender-responsive policies, family support, and crime prevention strategies. My research questions. So this is a mixed method research. Qualitative question: what are criminal offenders' perspectives on being reared in single mother households in the Bahamas? Quantitative: is there a relationship between perception of childhood trauma and attitudes towards crime and criminal offenders? Is there a relationship between perceptions of family background and attitudes towards crime among criminal offenders? Is there a relationship between absentee fathers and attitudes towards crime among criminal offenders? When fathers left. So in my research on the state of boys and males in the Bahamas, I found this particular period, the contract era, to be quite interesting. Between 1943 and 1965, over 30,000 Bahamian men migrated to the US for farm work. Now, that 30,000 may sound small to you, but between the period presented, the population was between 80,000 and 120,000. So that 30,000 represented between 30 and 40% of the population at the time. Men's absence led to a colossal rise in single mother households and weakened paternal authority. This, in my opinion, was a significant point in Bahamian history. Women became sole caregivers, increasing strain on families and reshaping male socialization. Legacy of the contract. Some men never returned to their families. Other men returned having absorbed racism, violent discrimination, and antisocial values from the US South. During the period when the contract workers returned to the Bahamas, a crime culture was also imported. It just so happens around the same time as men started returning home, we started to see a rise in crime in the Bahamas. I believe that the return of those men and the changes and the way they saw the world after living in the US South, it impacted and it influenced Bahamian culture tremendously. We saw elevated male homicide rates, poor educational outcome among males, and an increase in childbirth outside of marriage. The mother presence but father absence, in addition to the cultural transmission, in my opinion, helped shape today's pattern of youth violence and male criminality. Remnants of the contract. By the 1960s, about 70% of children in the Bahamas were born to married couples and 30% out of wedlock. By 2012, these figures had reversed, with over 60% of the children born out of wedlock. And if you look at this chart here, you will see that around the time that the contract workers had returned, starting at around 1973, you see crime in the Bahamas starting to rise. The figure from 2008 to 2025 shows a similar rise. Prior to independence in 1973, there were fewer violent crimes reported. Now, if you look at this, you will realize that the period of the contract was around 20 years. So over that period of time, let's just say a male whose father had left, he would be around 20 when his father returned. And then there were obviously some other social dynamics going on where some of the wives, they had started, according to the research, they had started other relationships. Of course, because the father never returned in some cases. So you have these boys growing up in a certain environment, maybe with a half brother. And this impacted the way they saw the world, the way they saw the home environment. A study of behavioral adaptation of Bahamians while evolving towards independence. This was an interesting research by Leffley. In fact, the research started in 1968, around the same time all of this was happening and the men were returning home. And in her research, where she focused on the modal attitude of Bahamians at the time and their perception towards the environment in which they lived in, research participants pointed out that father absent placed greater stress on how young men manage actions and situations. These were some of the thoughts that she was getting from males at the time. She also got this response: father absent also meant young men placed less emphasis on socially respectful behaviors. In addition to that, younger males in the study most often express anger through interpersonal aggression and frequently fantasize about fame and social status. So here, this is where we started to see males showing more aggression. Now, in my research, I thought this was quite interesting, a comparative timeline between welfare expansion and rise of single motherhood. You would see in the US during the same periods we're referring to, the 1960s and 70s, the welfare system in the US had expanded. But what also happened was single motherhood rose sharply. Similarly, in the Bahamas, around that same time, 1964, the Ministry of Welfare established the social services, and at the same time, single motherhood had also began to rise. So the question is, did welfare incentivize the rise in single motherhood? Or was it that the rise in single motherhood had incentivized welfare? Which led me to question, what are the links between the welfare system, single motherhood, and crime? According to Michael D. Tanner, the expansion of state welfare system encourages out-of-wedlock births and single-parent households, contributing to family instability that marginalizes young black men and increases their risk of crime through disrupted socialization. Now, some of what Tanner is saying here stems from US culture. Now, the same may not be true for the Bahamas, but we don't know because this is not an area that has been investigated. But in the US, we know that, for example, the social service or the welfare system, it incentivizes this idea of mothers continuing to have children within a single parent family. So for example, if mothers have a spouse or if mothers live with a boyfriend, they cannot access the funding. So therefore, in many instances, these mothers, they continue in this life and they make little effort to get out of the single mother situation with just rearing children. All right? That may not be the case for the Bahamas. I don't know, but certainly there's a significant amount of research saying that this is a part of the culture. Father absence and youth incarceration. Harper and McLennan is pointing out that adolescents in single mother homes are 50% more likely to engage in crime than those in two-parent families. Additionally, poverty, inadequate schooling, and low parental involvement intensify the risk. No father presence. Children who never live with their father face the highest odds of incarceration. Youth in step-parent households have nearly 3 times higher incarceration rates than those in single-mother homes. The policy insight: father involvement, not marriages alone, is critical to reducing youth crime and supporting healthy adolescent development. According to the United Kingdom, over 70% of incarcerated youth come from single parent homes, mostly mother led. In the United States, 63% of male prisoners were raised in single mother households. In Jamaica, rising youth crime parallels growth in female headed households, though gang culture and school failure also play key roles. Single mother households in the Bahamas accounts for 85%. Key insights: across diverse contexts, father absence strongly correlates with youth incarceration, reinforcing the need to examine childhood trauma among offenders from single mother families. Criminal offenders in the Bahamas. In the research by Fielding and others, the research was conducted with 367 male inmates. More male offenders reported either living with their mother, sisters, or grandmothers, most likely female figures. Implications: two-parent households reduced drug and gang risk. Father absence is a critical driver of male criminality in the Bahamas. Early interventions and male mentorship disrupts crime cycles. From this same study, 6.6% of the offenders never lived with a mother. 38% never lived with a father. 50% their parents were separated. Another 50% reported that male relatives other than brothers were generally absent from the home. More males reported living with either sister or grandmother. 86.3% of male inmates were physically punished as children, which is common in our culture, with various objects such as electric cords against them, or if it was the mother who led the home that punished these males. Again, this is an area of investigation and exploration. Most inmates did not believe that the physical punishment was abusive. The interesting thing about this research is, this particular study is, while most males didn't believe that the physical punishment was abusive, when males asked who would they live with once they were returned back to society, they said they intend to go back to their mothers. In this research, Fielding and others concluded that more research is needed to examine the nature of the lifelong trauma. With that said, Fielding also explored aggression in mothers. In his work, Aggression and its Correlates in the Bahamian Community, with a focus on corporal punishment, in this study, researchers found the following. Women in the Bahamas are responsible for more acts of corporal punishment towards their children than men. Additionally, children who experience corporal punishment often display aggression as adults. In this study, female aggression scores in the Bahamas are higher than international comparisons. Children abused display anger, outbursts, behavioral problems, and long-term emotional harm. Conclusion: unchecked maternal aggression place children at risk of long-term harm. Now, in this research, Fielding and others also point to this transference of aggression. So, for example, when fathers, based on the condition of the separation, perhaps they leave mothers hurt and angry. So the father's aggression transfers to the mother, and the mother's aggression transfers to the child. And there's a cycle. So here, feeling speaks to breaking the cycle of aggression and abuse requires parental reforms. From discipline to trauma, how parenting shapes behavior in male identity. This is another research by Fielding and Balance. The Bahamian justification for using corporal punishment within the home, a Christian habit. The practice of corporal punishment by Bahamian parents is especially pronounced in the rearing of boys, who face a higher risk of physical abuse through the use of objects. This reflects a long-standing cultural norm where punishment, rooted in religious belief, is used to shape boys' behavior, but also blurs the line between discipline and abuse. This is important because this is linking aggression and abuse, in this particular case, to mothers, an area that has not been well explored. It's not been well explored. Usually when we think about male aggression, we think about the company they keep or perhaps another male. So this is a new area of exploration locally. Trauma and criminal behavior. The research shows a strong connection between traumatic experiences and criminal behavior. Scholars argue that trauma often acts as a key mechanism in shaping offending patterns. Theoretical framework. This study applies a hybrid framework to explain this complex nature of crime. The trauma framework by Carlson and Dahlenberg, focusing on trauma, points out that trauma triggers stress, aggression, and substance abuse. This particular framework also states that the effects of trauma is shaped by severity and social context. Social learning theory by Bandura, which speaks to the fact that children learn by observation. So if we have a situation where a significant amount of homes are led by female mothers, they're arguing here that whatever the child learns, they learn from what they see. But again, this is not explored. We don't actually know what they're seeing in the home, in a single mother-led home. So it requires more research. In their work, Bandura points out maternal stress or illness may model maladaptive behaviors. And if maladaptive behaviors are being modeled, then the boys will adopt these behaviors. General strain theory by Agnew. Crime points out crime as coping with loss or negative experience. Here, the research is saying that father absence is negatively impacting males. So the crime we see may be linked to the loss of a father. Again, we don't have that information and it needs to be investigated. To what extent losing one's father or not ever knowing one's father impacts criminal offenders or a life in crime. Anger and frustration drive criminal behavior amid poverty. The research points to the fact that female-led households usually struggle financially. I don't know if that's true today, but the research points that that's one of the differences between a father-led home or where a father is present. The home is usually financially secure. So in a female-led home, is it the case that males are angry and frustrated and this poverty that they may be experiencing is driving their criminal behavior or their criminal conduct. Attachment theory by Bowlby speaks to secure parental bonds are key for emotional regulation and pro-social growth. Therefore, where males lack bonding, in the case of an absent father, this negatively impacts their conduct. Inconsistent or absent care also raises antisocial behaviors and risk. Methodology, as stated earlier, I intend to use a mixed method approach, which combines both quantitative and qualitative narratives. The purpose, to get a broader and deeper understanding of offenders raised in single mother households. Approaches, quantitative, a post-positivist correlational approach, and qualitative, a phenomenological approach. Design non-experimental correlational research. I'm looking to use a convenient sample of criminal offenders. This will be about 30 males. I intend to use a cross-sectional survey administered in a secure facility. The quantitative instruments, I intend to use the family background scale, which looks at parental supervision, deviance, and maltreatment. Additionally, the childhood trauma questionnaire, which focuses on abuse and neglect experiences. And the third is the criminal sentiment scale, which focuses on attitudes towards law and identification with criminals. With these instruments, I intend to learn about relationships. Quantitative analysis, I intend to use a person-product-moment correlation. The goal is to examine the relationship between childhood trauma and attitudes towards crime, as well as family background and attitudes towards crime. Qualitative method, I intend to use semi-structured interviews. They should last anywhere between 25 and 35 minutes with criminal offenders or previous offenders. Setting, a private prison room or secure phone lines. I intend to ensure that I have informed consent and voluntary participation, as well as confidentiality. And in addition to that, to ensure that participants know that if they would like to discontinue their participation in the research, that they can do so. Qualitative analysis. So I intend to use the thematic analysis. This is where you take the data that you get from your participants, and then you look at that information and look for familiar trends and to transcribe the information. The initial coding will be done in vivo. This is where I organize, analyze, and categorize, as well as tag the data. There, I will look for themes to extract from the data. Themes as in common ideas across all participants. And then there will be a final interpretation of key patterns, which will lead to my discussion. Data security and storage. I intend to use a password-protected digital files and locked cabinets. All interviews and notes will be secured and stored per research ethics standards. Summary of endpoints. My primary endpoint, would be the correlation between childhood trauma and family background, and as well as criminal attitudes. Secondary endpoint, thematic insight into offenders' lived experience of single mother household, exactly learning what they experience being read in those spaces. Research contribution, I hope to provide empirical evidence linking single mother households and male pathways to crime, as well as uncover psychological, developmental, and cultural specific factors in parent-child dynamics unique to the Bahamas. I also hope to add to scholarly dialogue on childhood trauma, family culture, and criminal intent. Policy and societal impact. Hopefully this work will inform government policy on child rearing and crime prevention. It will support laws mandating paternal involvement beyond financial support, and identifying needs of high-risk communities with many single mother families. Expected outcomes, to gain a clearer understanding of how absent fathers affects boys' development, gain insight into emotional strain, abuse, and neglect as drivers of crime, and actionable strategies to mitigate rising crime rates and improve outcomes for boys and society. That is the end of my presentation. And again, this is a research proposal, so I look forward to your comments, recommendations. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Archer, could you stay on so that you can field questions from the audience? So do we have any questions from the floor? I recognize.
I think your presentation was excellent. I myself have done research in the past where I used a phenomenological study, so your proposal was brilliant. One of my questions is, your evidence shows strong correlations between trauma, household structure, and incarceration. So what reform should be prioritized in our Bahamian criminal justice system, do you think? I know it's a proposal, but you have read a large body of work and you've quoted that in your research as well. So if you've also come across anything in your readings or in the literature, that would also be great. Thank you.
In terms of reform, I strongly support mandating paternal or father involvement and not just financial involvement. So even in cases where there's separation, I would like to see policy that mandates that fathers have caretaking responsibilities. This is for males and females, but for this particular study, I would really like to see more fathers involved in the lives of their sons. And of course, we know that there are reasons why some fathers are not in their child's life. It could be that they themselves may be a criminal offender. They may not be someone deemed to be healthy for the child. But I still believe that we need to create different pathways and avenues to ensure that more fathers are involved in the life experience of their children, because the research is telling us even small involvement is sufficient to change the direction or the path of males. But again, I believe that fathers need to be involved in the lives of their girls as well. Because interestingly, the research is showing similar patterns with girls whose fathers are not present. The growing negative patterns of behavior we are seeing among girls as well in homes that are female led.
Afternoon. Thank you for a wonderful and thorough presentation of ideas and information. Like three sort of points. And you touched on a part of it, saying that the research shows that sort of small presence, right? Like the simple thing, there's a significant difference in development, young men, right? I wanted to ask a question: is there any focus on men who are sort of physically present but emotionally and psychologically absent? Like they come home and they sleep, but they have no time for anything else. And is there a big is there research and is there a big difference? I know historically you reference the contract and sort of these major economic dynamics that cause shift. But what about Junkanoo? And the absence of fathers in the home to that extent, which connects to the, you there, I know you're there, I see you, and then sometimes I don't see you, but I see your shoes, I know you've been here. And then the last point, you talked about the nuclear family. I think it's a forced construct versus a false construct. To what extent would a return to or a greater acceptance or appreciation of an extended family model, you think, impact young men, the presence of other men in the family close by, or a different type of extended family model where the father's household, right, like there's not a separation really between households, and the child is equally comfortable in this household versus that household, a sort of different definition of extended family space.
Okay. Excellent question. The purpose of this research is really to answer all of those questions. But I would say that in the study by Feeling and Others Are Prisoners, male offenders did say that they said their brothers were males in the home who they saw, but other than that, they didn't have access to any mentors. Definitely there was the absence of a father. In addition to that, you had like 50% of the males said that, look, I had no father at all. So I assume that's the other 50%, or within that group, some of them did have male presence in their lives. But the purpose of this research is really to get clarity on some of the questions you just asked, right? On all of the questions you just asked.
I was just wondering, your slide, great proposal, by the way. I think it's important research. I was just wondering, the slide where you were talking about welfare and kind of how it incentivizes kind of women to abuse a system. I was kind of would like some more elaboration.
So this is, again, I tried to point out here is while I saw similarities in the US, the expansion of their welfare system, and the establishment of the welfare system in the Bahamas, it happened around the same time. In addition to that, we saw a rise in single mother household as well at the same time, which is what I found interesting. Now, in the US, their welfare system is developed in a way that only women who does not have close contact with the the father of their children are allowed to benefit from the system. So I watched a few documentary on it, and some of the women who were a part of the system in their communication, they pointed out that they would rather stay in the welfare system and not marry a man who couldn't financially sustain them. Because if they married someone who couldn't sustain the family, they would no longer be able to benefit from the system. So you had women having children but not marrying the male because they didn't want to lose the financial support from the US system. I was pointing out that that's the culture there. I don't know what it is here. And it's something that I would want to explore. I don't even know how many of the inmates, the 367 inmates that were part of the study, I don't even know if any of them were in a home that utilized the welfare system here. This is something that I would want to have a better understanding of as well.
Yeah, and I wanted to pick up a little bit on what Jasmine pointed there because, so the slide, the reference was Michael Tanner. And Michael Tanner was big at the Cato Institute, was a big libertarian entity. And so that research very much supports that kind of small government premise that libertarian is there. But it also pushes a narrative that was created back in the 80s of the welfare model that wasn't really a thing. And that research doesn't talk about the other systemic factors that play into that. So anecdotally, you may see this or that, but the reality is of racism and historic social and economic marginalization in certain communities that plays out against what that system is. And I think there's a lot of other components that go within that space. So I don't know that that's the premise, but by including that to some degree, behind the scenes of what you're talking about, there's an emphasis on the role of men in a family on the male child, but there's almost behind the scenes you're not fully accounting for the dynamics or the importance or the stability that women bring into those single mother circumstances. So I think it's important as you play that out that also is represented so that you're getting a focus on what you really want to target.
Agreed. I wanted to also be clear that my work is to give voice to offenders' perspective. I want to know what they think. They're the one who live in these spaces. Like we have our theories and our understandings, but this is their lived experiences. I want to hear from them whether or not they see a connection between, if they themselves see a connection between their identity as benefits of social welfare system, if that impacts their self-identity. I don't know. So is this something that I want to explore?
Your future participants, is this one of the reasons why you chose phenomenology as part of your mixed method approach?
Yes.
Good presentation. I want to know the focus on crime, why the focus on criminal offenders, to the extent that I can see public policy relevance if it was more broadly targeted. In terms of males, and you mentioned lightly male identity, I also thought it was very interesting. You talked about trauma, but the trauma of finding out you have a brother that you may have not known that was from your mother. To consider that trauma within the light of sweethearting and how that influenced Bahamian males, I think that's really interesting. And I want to know, in terms of, sorry, I forgot the last one. But I want to know why the focus on criminal offenders and not just boys and males in general, in terms of identity and trauma, that the sexual interactions of the parents producing offspring and a young boy finding out that he has additional brothers or sisters, considering that trauma and how that shapes what Bahamian male may consider his role and identity and even see marriage as. What are your thoughts on that? Oh, I remember the last one. Did you find in the study why did they say Bahamian women are more aggressive than international levels of aggression?
They may have, but I can't tell you right now. I'd have to go back to the research. Why I chose criminal offenders? I don't have a brilliant answer to that. When I returned from university, I didn't study this subject matter, but I always had a passion to work with males, and I've been working with males. Homeless males, just high school students, I've worked with males. Um, and I just decided to do a systematic literature review. I said, I want to know everything about males in the Bahamas. I want to know about their struggles. I want to know about. So I went and I looked for any piece of research that said anything about males. And when I came across the research on our prisoners, I was stuck there. And I wanted to give more voice to those prisoners. That's essentially. I just wanted to give them a voice, an opportunity to share more about how they got where they're at. In my work in Barbados with homeless men, a lot of the times when you sat with them, they would say, I used to have a house and I used to have a business, and they'll tell you their story. Well, these inmates, they have stories, and their stories start from yay high, and that's where I want to start from.
I know this is a proposal, but I just had like kind of a hypothetical, but also kind of realistic. My grandfather worked on the project. On the contract as well. I was raised in a single mother home and had corporal punishment as well, and so I'm curious why, if also you found that Bahamian women are more aggressive, or in this context, why women are not observed exhibiting the same levels of aggression and things as such, these trauma instances as men are.
Why women don't display?
If they can be born and raised out of the same situations, the same trauma, the same contract in the family, the same single mother home, what's the difference?
It's an interesting
question.
And
are more aggressive.
That's an interesting question. You could ask the same question as it relates to crime too, right? How could a brother and sister raised in the same home have exposed to some of the same conditions? This research is also pointing out that from a corporal punishment standpoint, boys are more likely to be punished, more so than girls. There is a wealth of information. I couldn't even go into all of it. But in terms of the educational system, how the research is showing I don't want to say favor, but girls seem to thrive more in the educational system than do boys. So it's an interesting question. That too needs to be explored. I can't say why, but it definitely needs to be explored.
I think you have to look at, because we did another study too on prison, and we also looked at female inmates, the profile of the female inmate too. So we have to look at their socialization, how we rear our boys and how we rear our girls. And in terms of females, you are supposed to be reared as caregivers, as caretakers. Boys are supposed to be responsible for the family, and they also have free reign. So when we're looking at why more men than women are in crime, we have to look at how we rear our children. And girls get a different kind of rearing, a household, and as opposed to the boys, where we tend to let them be free, free-spirited. They're supposed to take care of the family. They can do everything. Boys don't get pregnant. And when girls get pregnant, well, you don't want to spoil their chances if they're being educated, the boys, because they have to look after the family. And so all of that responsibility falls on the female. And then when she has a child, and then she's going to look for somebody else, and she's going to get into a relationship. And in the relationship, fella says, to show you love me, you got to give me a child. Or she feels in order to keep him, I have to have a child for him, because then he'll stay and he will support the other child. And so, as you mentioned, there's a cycle, and you also have to look at that cycle as well, in terms of, and of course, we also have to look at the fact that how women view the husband, you mentioned it, or the boyfriend. If I break up with a fella, I don't want to see him again. And so you go on to somebody else. And if I'm angry at him, how else am I going to get back at him by not keeping him away from his child? The man might want to, but because I don't want him to be around, this is my punishment for him, for not treating me well, for not giving me child support, for abusing me. Then the child becomes my, becomes my leverage against the father, and so the cycle also continues. So I tell my child, you're just like your no good pa. You're no good, and because he reminds her of the father, abuse comes in. So it's really so we really have to look at some.
Thank you. And to complement that, there's research by Ian Bennett, done right here at at the College of the Bahamas at the time. But you have university students, male students, who are not offenders, but they have a conversation about their life in a single mother-led home. And they refer to many of what was just referenced on daddy left and now I'm the man of the house. And they talk about what their new role requires of them. One male pointed out that he had to move from full-time to part-time to help take care of the family. So there's a lot of research out there on the experiences of males. Yeah.
We have to end it there.